And here we are with another episode of All Things Conflict with me, your host, Maria Arpa. And in today's episode, I'm really delighted to welcome Hesham Puri, who is a founder, director and partner at MK Law. Hesham is a criminal defence lawyer who specialises in professional excellence and customer care, and his dedication, as you'll see in this conversation, his dedication just shines through. So let's dive into the conversation, and I'm sure there's going to be some amazing pearls of wisdom. Thank you. Hesham, thank you so much for making the journey up here to do this conversation in person. We've known each other quite a long time. I've known you since way before you started your firm, MK Law, and you are a solicitor and a criminal defence lawyer. It's a joy to share this. This series is called Justice Redesigned. And so I really would love to open up what you do, the clients you work for. You know, what does this all mean?
First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here, Maria. You've been in my life a long time, so I'm really enthusiastic about coming here today. So, yeah, my job, criminal defence lawyer and run a business as well. So there's two things I do. But my real job is trying to assist and advise those who find themselves in the criminal justice system, either being investigated or charged, and they'll come to me, and really to navigate them through that process, which can be quite traumatic for some people, and hopefully get them, I'm going to say the result, the right result, but it's actually the result that just is something that we can achieve, because sometimes expectations of what we can do can't be met.
So, I mean, my experience in the criminal justice system has been that it takes, even if it just takes quite a long time to understand it, to understand all the pieces, to understand that whole journey. So I've met lots of bewildered people. I mean, I've met people who've ended up in prison because I do prison work. I've sat in courts. I've, obviously in the community. And I meet people who have been in trouble with the police, and then they're charged, and then they go on this journey that can last 2 or 3 years. And they have to learn a whole new vocabulary. They don't really know what's happening. And I guess then they become very dependent on you to guide them through that. So maybe you could sort of talk about what that's like.
I mean, it starts off actually quite with, in my view, the police inflicting trauma on you, because they arrest you at a time that's inconvenient, shove you into a police station at some ridiculous hour in the morning, and then expect you to answer a load of questions. It's not an ideal start to your journey, because I think that already puts you on the back foot. And then you've got to help them through, as you say, it is a completely different language. And clients sometimes think it's black and white, but it isn't. It's, there are a lot of different areas, a lot of issues that are going on. So they come to me after they've been arrested. If they end up probably with me in the Crown Court on a relatively serious charge, and as you say, it could be 3, 4, 5 years later that this case has been hanging over them, and then I have to take them through the process, and they find it difficult. They don't understand it. Why is my case going to take 3 years to get to trial? Why has this not happened? Why is that witness unavailable and my case has been adjourned? So the journey is up and down. And I say to clients, look, there'll be good days and bad days, and they'll just be like this. But hopefully at the end of your journey, if you have a trial, you're found innocent, but equally you might have to plead guilty, and we hope to get you the right sentence. But also within their journey, you also have to help their family members, because they join that journey. And also that's quite traumatic for them, but also hard on lawyers, because of course you're having to manage everybody in the group, if that makes sense. So it's just not your client, it's also your client's family as well.
So you've got a client, you've got their family, they may run a business, or, there's all sorts of dependencies, and you're having to sort of support and hold as a point of contact. And I'm guessing there's a whole lot of emotional content as well that you're dealing with.
Oh, yeah. And I think the main thing that I've really understood over the last few years is you need to speak to your clients, and because they're already thinking about one thing, their case. From the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, their whole life is encompassed by this one case. So yeah, they're always ringing, asking questions. Is there an update? Is there an update? And because the criminal justice system is broken, and we have to accept that, every part of it is broken. Everything takes much longer than it should do. They want updates, but we can't give them. And people are really, really struggling. I mean, the system. I would hate to either be a witness in a case or a defendant because of what the system is at the moment.
So when you say every part of it is broken, and everything takes a long time, which I know this anyway, but can you give clear examples of things that have fallen apart in the time you've been doing this?
So I started in about 98, qualified in about 2000. A magistrate's court case would probably take about 6 to 8 weeks from start to finish. A Crown Court custody case would finish within their custody time limits, which is I think about 180 days. But within start to finish 9 months. Gradually now, I've had clients who have been arrested, interviewed, bailed for about a year, then released under investigation because bail stops for another couple of years, and then finally they get charged, and they end up in court, and the court says, well, actually, we've got no space now for another 2 or 3 years to hear your trial. So some people have waited 7 or 8 years to get to the end of their case. And the amount of trauma that must put on everybody, and also it impacts on us because, of course, I'm having to manage that human being through those 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So the courts are broken. Police don't have enough money to investigate properly. Probation don't have enough people to do the work. This government has shut down so many courts, magistrates and Crown Courts, that we don't have enough. So now, if you appear at, I won't name the name of the court, quite a big court in East London, your trial is probably 2030. So if you turned up today, you're going to be told that your trial is in 2030.
And so how do you live with that uncertainty when you've got, and the possibility, because you can't plan for what's going to happen at the other end, can you?
No, and people change. You are not the same person.
Yeah.
Particularly from when you first committed that offence. Yeah. By the time you come to, you are a different person. Yeah. And equally, witnesses will change, and victims will have that hang over them. So yeah, everyone has changed.
Yes, and that's, of course, the victims waiting that long for some semblance of justice, if we can call it that.
Yeah.
And then, getting back to the technicalities of it, one of the things is it's all about evidence, isn't it? And maybe you could speak a bit to that because, evidence and truth might not be the same thing.
No. Yeah, evidence can be quite a blunt thing because a piece of evidence, if it's a fingerprint or a bit of DNA, okay, well, it establishes something, so that's evidence, but that doesn't necessarily mean it can tell you what the truth was of how the DNA got there or how that fingerprint got there. And also, a lot of things about interpretation. People, the police and the prosecution will interpret a piece of evidence. A lot of cases now have what's called cell site evidence. So if I ring you now and tomorrow the police got my phone, they'd be able to say that Hesham was in this area within about a 2-mile radius. So they can establish that. But what they would like to say was actually he was in this office doing a burglary, right? But the two things don't quite match up. So they would want to say that and say, well, this proves he must have been committing the burglary. And we would say, well, all it really establishes is that I was in the area and that's it. So I think it's the interpretation of evidence, sometimes the lack of evidence, because, of course, evidence over time disappears, or it is no longer, the police can no longer go and get a piece of evidence. And but truth, that's a different conversation. Evidence doesn't equal truth.
Yeah, so what's happening is we're looking at the evidence that come from the prosecutors and the evidence that the defendant can bring to prove, a different version of events. Yeah,
defendants, they're in a difficult position because, of course, when they first start on their show and they've been arrested, they don't normally think about, I better go and get some CCTV footage. I better keep that email or that WhatsApp message, or I better go and speak to all the people around the estate to get statements. They won't do those things. It's only when they get charged, suddenly they realise, oh God, I should have gone and done all these things and I can't do it anymore. And equally, lawyers are not funded enough at the initial stage to do those things for them, because there's no funding. If you're arrested, there's funding for that piece of interview. But once you're released, there is no funding unless you pay for it to do anything else. So that must mean by inference that lots of pieces of evidence is never getting collected by the defence because there's no funding.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is legal aid. You're talking about
early legal aid.
Vast number of people that are relying on legal aid.
Yeah.
And if the funding isn't there, I mean, we can have a whole conversation about cuts in legal aid, then really it's a two-tier justice system, isn't it? For those who can afford to pay and those who are reliant on...
It really saddens me to say that when I started, everyone got legal aid. And I mean, I represented multi-millionaires who still got legal aid. Right. But now you're in a system where it's means tested and lots of things are not in scope anymore. So yeah, if you've got money, you will have a fairer system. If you're on legal aid, we do the best we can within the parameters of the funding. But yeah, it's an unfair system. It's an unjust system, I'm afraid.
And then, but even doing the best you can within the parameters of the system, the funding, I mean, I know lots of law firms who are chucking in their legal aid contracts. Certainly in the world of family mediation where there's legal aid, lots of firms, lots of mediators chucked in those contracts because it's more expensive to do the case than the funding.
I haven't got the figures here, but the number of duty solicitors that have been reduced, it's a huge amount over the last 5 to 10 years. The number of criminal legal aid firms has shrunk because, well, it's two reasons. Number one, there's not enough funding in the system, so you can't pay people well enough. And it's actually quite difficult work. So yes, I've got lots of friends who've now shut down their legal aid practices and gone, well, actually, I'm just going to become a private lawyer. And whilst they miss doing the legal aid work, because they just can't live.
Yeah. I mean, I know in the mediation world, and people probably don't know this stuff, you know, you can do a case and you could get a successful outcome or whatever it is. But when you get your audit, which could be 2 years or 3 years later, you can have all the money clawed back because your paperwork wasn't in order, not because there was anything wrong with the case.
Yeah, we are audited to death by the legal aid agency. One, you know, I'll give you an example. So when you go to a police station, you can claim your travel fares. And sometimes they will write to you and go, well, you've claimed £1 over there you should have done. So now we're going to audit all your files and we will go back to all your files and claw back £1 here and £1 there. So I think most firm owners just live in constant fear that the legal aid agency or the Ministry of Justice will just come in, audit you and go, actually, you're not fit for purpose because you made one small mistake, and then take your contract away from you.
So that's a really interesting, you use the word fear. And, you know, this is something funny I've been talking about in lots of different areas, and particularly in the justice system, but all over, is that what you tend to get is when you get something that's regulated in some way, or there's a sort of big brother bureaucracy, everybody is operating out of fear, which is not how these things are intended to be.
Legal aid firm owners live in fear that they're going to be audited, even though they've done nothing wrong. And, they're going to be shut down, or money's going to be called back, or they're going to be told that you're not good enough. And it's not, as you say, it wasn't how we started, but we've ended up in this place where regulation has equalled fear.
Yes, I mean, we only have to look at Ofsted, which is, you know, off track for this conversation, but it's all over the place. I've done some work with the regulator for accountancy, and the same thing. They're all living in fear. Everybody's living in fear under these regulators. But then how do you give your best?
I think it's really difficult. Obviously, I've been doing the job a long time, and I really love the job I do, and I enjoy it, and I enjoy being a criminal solicitor. But I think it's becoming harder and harder for people to really give their best because, you know, they're living in fear. And also, the generation below me, they're not interested in running firms because they can see the stress and pressure we're on. They're like, actually, we just want to work here, but we're never going to run a firm. And then, so that means what's going to happen in 5-10 years is, I think, the number of criminal legal aid firms is going to diminish, and we may end up in sort of American public defender system. And I think the government probably wants that, even though that's more expensive, because we do have 10, or I can't remember. There's a few public defender services in the UK. They're very expensive, but I think that's what we'll end up having.
Yeah, because it's just simply not worth the stress of running a firm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And yet through all that, I mean, I know your firm really well, and I know you and co-founder and, you know, the people in there, you know, I know that this is coming from a really good place. But tell us some success stories.
Yeah, success, you know.
I mean, well, first of all, we have to define success, I suppose.
Yeah, so success is, it's not always the most biggest case, the most interesting. He it's a really small case, you know, representing somebody, for example, that's had an altercation with the police, and he or she's been charged with assault emergency worker, and of course now the police have to wear body cameras, and those cases I actually really do enjoy, because invariably what happens is once you really push the prosecution on disclosure and we get the cameras, it turns out that actually your client hadn't pushed, kicked, punched the officer, and they've just made it up. And interestingly enough, we do a lot of that work, and we find a lot of success, because actually, unfortunately, and we've just seen the stuff at Charing Cross, that's come out in the panorama, the police do misbehave. And then sometimes, obviously, we do a lot of work with children. I think some of the successes are diverting that child away from the criminal justice system. I think that's a success, because I think my fear is once a child's gone through that process, the fear of, I say fear, I think people think that if a child gets arrested, that's going to scare them into never doing things gone wrong again. That doesn't work.
No, I know that from work I've done.
And sometimes success is just getting your client, getting their journey shortened by some sort of resolution, you know, because dragging it out is just painful for them. So success might just be, actually, we managed to get an agreement with the prosecution to a lesser charge, and your case now finishes.
Right, yeah. And yeah, so I want to go back actually, because I didn't really pick up on it, but it was stuck here, about the whole idea of police arresting people, you know, in the middle of the night, or, you know, at the most awkward times. And there's a couple of really good examples in the media. There's a guy on YouTube, I think his name's Dr. K, and they sent 6 police officers to his house over something he posted or something, and dragged him away in front of his kids. That's been quite big. And then the other one is, and I don't want to get into the politics of the View, but Graham Linehan, the writer of Father Ted and the IT Crowd, who was greeted off an aeroplane by 5 police officers, you know.
I don't really understand why I know why they do it, because their view is put you into some trauma. You know, if they arrest you unexpectedly at 5 a.m, that's going to put you in a vulnerable position. But it's just, it doesn't really help the investigation. And I don't know why they're trained to do it. And they even do it, so I can see from both sides. So I've got a client who got arrested at 6 o'clock in the morning because his partner said that he'd been sending her some rude messages. But he's got the kids, so the door gets kicked in, and he's got 2 children who see dad handcuffed and dragged away. And I just think, on what planet do you think that was okay? I understand with very, very serious crimes, there is that they need to arrest you without you knowing, take some devices, gather evidence. But there's a lot of cases where it's unnecessary.
Completely unnecessary.
And actually, they could just invite you in for an interview.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And give you the chance to bring a lawyer with you.
Yeah.
Because that's a whole nother thing, isn't it? People are persuaded to go and talk to the police unaided or on their own. And the police often say, well, if you've got nothing to worry about if you haven't done anything. But that isn't the answer. The answer is, it's nothing to do with that. You're inviting me into a world of which I know nothing. And I need someone who can guide me through this.
It astonishes me. Bearing in mind it's a free system, so if you get arrested, it's free for everybody. Yeah. I think the uptake is only 50% of people in custody choose a solicitor or a lawyer. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Bearing in mind, A, it's free, and as you say, it's a world you don't understand and a language you don't understand. The police, I think, discourage people and say, look, if you get a solicitor, it will take ages. Yeah. And I also think there's a reputation that duty solicitors don't know what they're doing. Because they're government lawyers. You hear it say, you're a government lawyer. Actually, we're all the same. You know, we're all good lawyers, but that's the perception.
So, and I think that there's a lot of misinformation in the public. I mean, obviously, there are people who just have no idea. I mean, there are people who come from other cultures, or, this isn't their first language, or this isn't where they grew up, and they have no idea how our systems work, so you've got that as well, I expect.
Yeah, but going back to that point about unrepresented, I spend a lot of time representing people who didn't have a lawyer, because the way they answered questions in interview came across as they might have done something wrong. But when you unravelled it, they'd done nothing wrong. But the pressure of being in that environment, and language, obviously being in London, a lot of people, language is not their first. And they struggle with communication, and they don't understand the questions. And of course, the police, we call it an interview, it's an interrogation, really. It's pressure, question after question, because obviously they want a confession. And as we all know, people sometimes confess to stuff they haven't done.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think there have been scientific tests on getting people to say things.
If you wear them down enough,
yeah,
and haven't slept, you've been in custody for, let's say, 17, 18 hours, you haven't really eaten because the food's terrible, you're then dragged out in an interview room. I think a lot of people just break and say, yeah, if that's what you say, I did it.
Well, I mean, it's completely different, but that idea of putting people under pressure, the old commercial mediation model, now we're talking about mediation and people resolving things, was very much about keeping people in their separate rooms and going between the rooms and just being there for 10 or 12 hours. I mean, eventually people say, oh, just settle this,
Yeah, I think, and unfortunately, I think there's a lot of miscarriage of justice because people just admit to stuff. And when you already defund a system, obviously people aren't getting proper representation. Then, of course, they're just pleading guilty because there's no one really there to look at these cases properly.
So in America, they have this thing where you can say, I'm pleading the fifth, Do we have an equivalent of that here?
No. So the process here is obviously, once you get to trial, you have the choice of giving evidence. You don't have to give evidence. The burden is on the prosecution to prove the case. But of course, common sense would dictate that if you don't stand up and say something, the jury might think, well, that's because you've got something to hide. But you can't just plead the fifth. And if you're in the witness box and you're asked a question, you have to answer it. And if you don't, the judge can say you're in contempt.
Oh, right, okay. But earlier on, before we've even got to court, like when you've been arrested and, and all of that, can you just, is there a way to say, and what I mean by pleading the fifth is that, or taking the fifth is, the Fifth Amendment is the right to say nothing, isn't it?
So you something? The caution the police say is you don't have to say anything. However, if you fail to mention when questions something which you later rely on, it may harm your defence. Yeah. So you can go no comment in a police interview. You then get to trial. You can then give your explanation, and the court could invite, the judge can direct the jury to draw an adverse inference to basically say, if that was true, why wasn't it said right at the beginning of the case? Obviously, what would normally be the response to that is, well, actually, if I was there and I'd advised them, then they can rely and say, well, actually, I was given advice by a solicitor and I followed that advice. And the judge will say to the jury, well, if you accept that explanation, then don't draw an adverse inference for their failure to answer questions in an interview.
So these are all the little points along the way, and they happen all along the way, that if you have no understanding of it, you're just going to fall through the trap door, surely.
Yeah, you are. And then when you get to court, now in the Crown Court, you have to serve a defence case statement, which is another document setting out your defence. If you don't do that properly, another adverse inference can be drawn. So, yeah, I think for defendants, it's a very difficult world to go without a lawyer. But even with the lawyer, it's very difficult for them to understand.
Yeah. So would you say then that you've got two roles, really? One is the technical part of the job, which is getting people from A to Z with the minimum amount of distress, or at least, whatever, with the technical know-how, that's what I mean. And then the other part of the job is talking them off the ledge.
Yeah, I actually think I do the second more than the first now. I think the process, obviously I know it so well, it's easy to navigate. I can explain it in a way they understand, but it's managing them now, which is getting harder and harder. A, because of the delay. And also, I just think people, I've just seen over the last 20 years, people are more traumatised. There's so much more trauma in the world and misunderstanding. And I think actually, okay, I'll give you an example. I'm on the way here today. I got a phone call from someone who'd been referred, who wants to surrender at a police station. And we spent an hour not really talking about the case, me just talking him into saying, look, the right thing to do is go and surrender yourself. And then he was just talking about all the trauma and all the problems and how he felt. So yeah, it is the second part more than the first now.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I had something like that years ago when I was doing a lot of on-the-ground community stuff. And it was a guy who, as a result of some training he'd attended, said, I'm actually on the run. And listening to you and what you've talked about, I realised that, I could go to prison for 2 or 3 years. This way I'm going to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. So it's completely done. But I'm too scared to hand myself in because I'm black and I've told myself I'm going to get beaten up in the police cells. So I was thinking, what can I do about this? What can I do about this? So I went to a different police. I had to contact somewhere else and said, what happens when someone comes in to custody? And these are all things that people just don't know. And they were really good. They showed me the custody suite and showed me all the cameras and said, so there are cameras 24/7. But what he wants to do is hand himself in on a weekday at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning. So he's not going to spend the night in the cells. And for God's sake, don't do it on a Friday because you'll end up there all weekend. And it was just like, wow, this is just information people don't know. So I was able to go back and then I called the police and said, hypothetically, if there was this person, and first of all, there was a lot of, well, if you do know someone, you have to tell us. And I'm like, no, this is just hypothetical. And then we brokered it. And he was actually, I took him there, I met him, I took him to the police at 6 o'clock in the morning and they got the papers ready and they got him through to the magistrate straight away.
In fact, that's exactly the conversation I had with this person and someone yesterday who surrendered this morning. But there was a time where I could ring my police, the local police, and say, look, so-and-so thinks they might be wanted. Can you just tell me? Yes or no? And then we'd go, okay, no problem, we'll arrange to surrender. But now because of GDPR and data protection, the police would just say, well, if he thinks he or she's wanted, then just get them to surrender. Yeah. But of course, that just adds in all this delay because traditionally I'd have arranged an appointment, I would go with them, we could shorten the whole process, but no, surrender. Then they have to wait a few hours. The police get ready for interview, then I get called. So you're adding in all this delay that's so unnecessary.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've got somebody who's at the beginning of this whole thing. They're completely unenlightened as to what this is going to do and how their life is going to change and all the rest of it. What should someone do? What would you do if you're at that early stage?
At the very early stage, and even if you think you're about to be arrested or you've been arrested, obviously speak to a lawyer. That's the very first thing you should do. The second thing you probably should do is try and preserve any evidence that you might think you need. And even if you're not sure, that's why you should speak to a lawyer, because they'll be able to help you with what you can and what you should keep hold of, because you don't know how long this case is going to drag on for. And the third thing is, other than your lawyer, maybe have a family or a friend that can help you navigate it, because you'll need support other than your lawyer. So that could be a family member or a good friend, someone you can think that, they can hold me up while I go through this process. Some clients don't want to tell anyone. And I said, look, that's going to be really difficult for you. Maybe it's because the shame of being arrested or they don't want anyone to know. Those clients I find it the hardest. Yeah. And then what they then do is they start thinking that I'm also their friend. And I have to say, look, I'm your advisor, I'm your lawyer. And yes, occasionally you can read, but I'm not here to do all the other things that you need. And that's actually someone else has to help you through that. So yeah, they're the things I think you should do. And
there are places that can help, aren't there? There are other support systems for people in this kind of. But the very first one is called the Samaritans.
Yeah, so the Samaritans. Obviously, depending what if you're an alcoholic, AA. So there's all those things you can go to for help. But yeah, there isn't much, but there's certainly some other places you can go and get some help, and it's difficult. I think because obviously a lot of clients do have either drug addiction or alcohol or some addiction. They should go and use those services, definitely. Yeah. And if you can afford it or you can get it on the getting I'm going to use the word therapy, but someone to go and talk to is really important. And it could be, someone like you, Marie. You'd be amazing, actually. If I could just take you, multiply you by a million, and just have you with me, that would be perfect. Between the two of us, we could fix the system.
We could
heal the trauma, and I can navigate them through their case.
Yeah, what an amazing partnership that would be. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Actually, that's my fourth advice. Speak to Maria.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So this has been absolutely fascinating, and I think it's really enlightening. And I know that, lots of people in your industry know this, but I don't know that this information is as public as it should be. So it's really wonderful to be able to put some really practical stuff out and give people knowledge.
Yeah.
But I have one last question for you. Is that okay? Can I?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So, and I've asked all my other guests in this series, if I were to give you the keys to the Ministry of Justice today and say you can make one change, what change would you make?
Well, that's a difficult question because there's so many changes. But
that's what everyone says.
Yeah, because everything needs changing. But if I could change one thing to improve the system, I think I would like to somehow introduce some sort of restorative justice program within the system that doesn't mean that everyone is accused of crime either ends up in prison, but equally some people could do with talking to people about what they've done, and maybe the more they would discuss what's happened in their lives, that might have an impact and reduce the number of people in the system. So I think because we don't have it, I think that's one thing that we probably could do with.
I think it's really important. I mean, I don't know if you remember or know that once upon a time the police had a restorative justice department and that was all disbanded, which is kind of unbelievable, really. And by restorative justice, a lot of things for me are restorative justice is about victims meeting offenders and all the rest of it, and that can be part of it, and it can be very cathartic. And there are some really amazing examples of this happening, and even friendships developing out of that. But it's restorative practices for me are based on, our current retributive system is based on who broke the rule, what rule has been broken, who broke it, what's the punishment. And so that really leaves the victim powerless in the situation because it's all happening over here. And in a restorative process, what we would be saying is, what is the injury, loss or harm? Who sustained it? And how do we repair it? And that opens up a whole raft of possibilities. And a victim meeting an offender is one possibility, but working with offenders to do what you're saying, to help them look in the mirror and see, is this who I want to be? Is this how I see myself in the world?
It's a diversion out of the criminal justice system. I think let's not bring them in. Right. So if we can do more work in the community, like you say, it doesn't have to have the police. You could have a restorative justice where you could deal with those participants with a view to get a resolution without it having to go into the criminal justice system. And
I think there's a lot that could be diverted that way. I mean, I remember looking at some statistics, and in violent crime, 75% of those cases, the two parties knew each other and had some kind of relationship beforehand. So what does that tell you? That tells you that there's, by the time we get to the violent act or the murder, and they knew each other, what we're learning, or what I understand, is that relationship got broken a long time ago and there was nobody there to help.
When you think of London, densely populated, people living in flats, in terraces, it's not insignificant that people that live in the countryside, there's less of these things going on because there's space and people are spread out. But when people are put together, there are going to be problems when you can hear what's going on above you or next to you, as you've said to me before. So, I think, that, and getting the community to take more responsibility and say, and this is stuff that, we've discussed in as part of my training with you. I think, I think that would be an amazing way to try and completely rechange the way we look at this.
Yeah, because there's also this other thing of, building over-reliance on local authority systems, statutory agencies, government total government. And I think it's the wrong path to totally rely on those services in the complicated world that we live in. So what are we going to do to help people to come together and take more responsibility for safety in their communities? I mean, my prison project was built on a very simple prospect, and it was, if you have 700 people in prison and you have 100 staff and you put all responsibility for safety onto that 100 staff, it is likely that the 100 staff are going to have to use more force than is necessary. But once you say, actually, to the 700, you need to take some responsibility for safety. You know, when you get on an aeroplane, they tell you we're all responsible for safety. I might be the air steward or whatever, but we're all equally responsible. Once you shift that, then you can, it doesn't mean the boundaries get crossed. It doesn't mean that the rules have to be redefined. But then suddenly there's a responsibility taking. And that's what we found. And that's been the success of our project.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love that project. I think it's an amazing project. The fact you've been able to do that with prisoners in a prison to make them take some responsibility. Yeah, I think
for helping each other.
And if it can work with them, it can work with anybody.
It can work with anybody, yeah.
And I just, but of course, the MOJ probably wouldn't like it because they can't really look at it, they can't analyse it, and they wouldn't have the guts to do it, I suspect. But yes, if anyone's listening, Lord Timpson, get on with it.
On that note, thank you for that little endorsement there. On that note, Hesham Puri from MK Law, you are an absolute star, and thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.